guys for taking the time to come along tonight. For those who don't know me, I'm Richard Unsworth. I'm based at Swansea University where I teach marine biology. I'm also a director of the marine conservation charity project Seagrass. We proposed this seagrass restoration project in Dale, and over the last couple of months, some of the sort of feedback that we've had directly and broadly across the different events is that there's not been enough detail provided. So Sue basically came up with this idea. Let's go back to the start. Apologise for the name, but let's kind of just start again and show everyone how we got to this point that we're here now, discussing seagrass and looking about a pathway forward. So I'm going to hopefully try and, in that pathway forward, respond to some of the, or all of the sort of broad groupings of concerns that people have placed over the last couple of months. So seagrass is a group of plants that live in the marine environment. So they're dependent on salt water for their complete life cycle. And in the UK we have two species. One tends to be high up on the intertidal and is called Zostra nolti. It's quite small species. And then we have Zostra marina, which tends to be more subtidal, although sometimes you get it on a sort of intertidal area. In Wales, we have seagrasses in North Wales on the Flint Peninsula, Zostra marina. We get some small patches along the Flint Peninsula. We get a small patch at Skoma. Then moving into the Haven, there's a long, very thin, long patch of seagrass in between the LNG terminals, and there's a small patch in Longmoor Bay. There's also some of the intertidal seagrasses around this area, which are sort of high up on the intertidal. An example is in Angle Bay. Generally, this plant, Zostra marina, that we're referring to in Dale, that we're proposing to plant here, is a plant that grows like this, straight kind of shoots, with a sort of cluster of 4 to 5 leaves at a time. You pull it easily, it breaks. In some places like the Isles of Scilly, where the water is really, really clear, it grows to about a metre in height. When we see it in Longmoor Bay, when we see it in North Wales and Gelliswick, it tends to be in that sort of range of about 50 centimetres to 70 centimetres. And when we get a year where we get lots of flowering occurring, then you get some of these extended shoots that are full of seeds, and they're a bit taller. You see them in the sort of August period. So, because it's an angiosperm, it produces seeds, it produces flowers. It's just like those kind of terrestrial cousins. And seagrass, it's a plant, so it has all those basic needs that other plants have. If you don't feed your tomato plants, they tend to wither away. But if you give them too many nutrients, too much food, they don't like it either. So nutrients are important. A plant that's living in the ocean, and it's very susceptible to the amount of light that's coming through the water column. So it needs a high light environment, and if there's the turbidity is too high, then it struggles. And if it's being subjected to a lot of sediments piling on it, it also tends to struggle too. Most important thing really is that seagrasses can't really survive where you've kind of got a high wave action. So it needs shelter. And ultimately, it likes those kind of things that boats like. It likes shelter, it likes soft sediments. So many places around the world, around the UK, there's seagrass, and there's also a lot of boat activity. So it's not surprising they come together. They don't like too many animals digging them up, and they tend to do a lot better when you've got lots of high density of plant, because it's sort of safety number. A number of years ago, we started thinking about the loss of seagrass around Wales, and thinking about what might be suitable environments for seagrass. We ran quite a basic model that kind of put some of these characteristics into it in terms of depth, in terms of soft sediments, in terms of shelter, and we did quite a coarse model that kind of predicted places where the environment was suitable for seagrasses. And one of these places was Dale. Not surprising, other places over towards Saundersfoot, kind of soft sediment, quite shallow, sheltered, further up the haven, reasonably good environments potentially for seagrass. I'll tell you a bit about how we got proposing a restoration project in this site over all these other locations. But just to reaffirm, seagrass is a pretty important habitat for marine biodiversity. The density of animals living in a seagrass meadow is much, much higher than when you actually look at bare adjacent habitat. And there's not just one study that's done that. It's not just me kind of doing a little study in North Wales. These are hundreds of studies that have been done throughout the whole Atlantic area and all around the world. So there's a huge wealth of evidence that shows that seagrasses harbour biodiversity. And that's because they create this kind of three-dimensional structure that is a great environment for animals to hide in. So if you're a shrimp and you want somewhere to hide from cod coming in or sea bass coming in chasing it, then seagrasses are a great place to go and hide. And therefore, it's not a surprise that many of the world's biggest fisheries are actually supported by seagrasses. So when we look at, for instance, Atlantic cod, then Atlantic cod can survive as a youngster in a mud bottom or sandy habitat. It'll be all right there, but its chances of survival are much lower than when it's hiding in some seagrass. And when it's hiding in some seagrass, it doesn't have to spend all its energy running away from predators. It doesn't have to spend its energy searching for food, because there's a lot of small crustaceans living in that seagrass. So it's a great place for something like a cod pollock, I'm pointing at a cod to grow up. We see these kind of patterns around the world. And there's been lots of experiments where people have either forcibly removed seagrass or through a sort of big accident removed seagrass. And what we've seen is then a consequential decline in the actual catch of various fisheries in that region. In Wales, there's actually reasonable evidence that we've lost seagrasses. As I explained, there's some reasonable patches around. There's seagrass that's sort of just about struggling on over in Gelliswick. There's some nice patches up here. But what we actually find is that there's lots of these white dots around, places that used to have seagrass no longer have extensive seagrass. These are some density measurements of the seagrass over by the LNG terminal, showing the decline. But it's not just in Wales that we've seen a decline in seagrasses. In parts of England and all around the world we've seen those declines. In England they've actually mapped some of the seagrasses a lot better than they have in Wales historically, and therefore these are the Stour and the Orwell, some areas where many moons ago I went and did my undergraduate degree, and these areas used to have extensive seagrass, hundreds and hundreds of acres of hectares of seagrass, and they no longer have it. So seagrasses have declined around the UK and in Wales. And we started to kind of think about this and think, can we actually do anything about it? And that was back in sort of 2012. And I didn't have any funding to do any work on it. We were just kind of launching Project Seagrass as a sort of small conservation entity. And then I was involved with a project called SeaCams in Swansea University. And I was approached by this company called Salix Bioengineering. And what they do is they grow plants for riverine restoration. And they'd been to the Netherlands and they wanted to grow seagrass in the laboratory to be able to sell to the Netherlands. So we started doing some initial trials in the laboratory. We did quite well for a period, but we never managed to get it to work in the lab. And at that point we started. So we planted these seed bag strings in Dale, and by 2018, 2019, they were doing very, very well. As part of that, we actually came across a patch of seagrass about sort of 5 metres by 5 metres, something approximately like that, and we were pretty surprised by that. And I know that some people have raised that as a concern, that potentially I planted it. There's no way. These are very mature plants of seagrass, and that sort of development of a meadow that thick, that advanced to mature, takes maybe 5 years or longer to be that advanced. I'd be very proud of myself if I planted that. I certainly didn't do it. But that spurred me to go back and look in the records. And at the time I was doing a review for the Milford Haven Waterway Surveillance Committee. And we dug up some records. I found a report by a guy called Quentin Kay in 1997. And he'd been through all the county flora records in Pembrokeshire. And he goes back to a guy called George, who found seagrass in about 1961. And there's reference to an area called Point Wood, about 200 yards southeast of Brigstones. In September 1958, a few plants were found, and there's a description that there was this area, that grid reference, if you check it, is just down there, is known locally as the Greens, and the plant was undoubtedly abundant in this locality about 30 years ago, approximately 1928 to 1930. Old records of the environment are very, very hard to get. We don't monitor the natural environment now enough. We definitely didn't do it 20 years ago enough, and we certainly didn't do it enough 50 to 100 years ago. The actual amount of information that we have from those times is very much dependent upon the sort of aristocrats who had the time to be the local lord going off collecting samples rather than it being the duty of a scientific or environmental officer working for a local county council, as it is now. So, move forward to 2018, sort of middle of 2018. I was approached by Sky Ocean Rescue and WWF. I think some of you met a guy called Ricardo Zanre, who presented one of the meetings here. I think he came to the Community Council meeting. And his colleague, Lindsay, her husband used to work for Swansea University, was aware of our field trials in Cornwall and in North Wales, and said, hey, Sky want to fund some applied marine conservation work, and we're thinking that seagrass restoration could be a great idea. Can you grow some seagrass in the Western Isles or North Devon in 2019? And I said, great idea, but North Devon, way too turbid, the conditions there's nowhere suitable for it, and I know absolutely nothing about these sites. There's no way in the timescales that they were proposing we could set up a project. But at that point I said, well, we've had these trials going on in Dale, could we move forward with them and turn them into a realistic restoration and demonstration site? So that's essentially how we got to this point. And what we were proposing then at that point is the UK's first major restoration project. No one's ever done this. All we've seen is seagrass loss. We've never actually seen seagrass recovery and restoration anywhere. It's a fantastic idea. Can we actually reverse some of this loss and this utter habitat decimation that we experience in the oceans around the UK and around the world? And I thought, we've got those trials, we've got the skills to do it, let's go for it. Our trials are working, we know that the environment is suitable for it, we can do some more assessments, let's propose a site. I guess with hindsight, it's a very easy thing to look back, but we looked at other projects, we kind of, lots of the great kind of successes in the US, and we're like, yeah, let's just do this. And at that point, we applied for what's called a Band 1 marine license from Natural Resources Wales, and thought, yeah, we can grow seagrass in Dale Bay. We can put it in the area, sort of on the edge of the moorings into Frenchman's Steps around that area. Yeah, that's a great plan. Let's move forward with that. And we knew there's some fishing activity there. We underestimated how much fishing activity was there, but we thought we could do that. But a sort of a backdrop of all this work is that we wanted to restore seagrasses, and unfortunately I took a bit too much of a gung-ho attitude in terms of some of the permitting, but the idea was always about working with local people and trying to ensure that people's livelihoods were respected and protected relative to what we were doing. And as I've explained at other meetings, I witnessed the highly protected marine conservation zone debacle. I've worked in places all around the world where I've worked with communities involved with conservation. My wife, Leanne, is a social scientist, and she's worked with indigenous communities around the world and trying to respect their rights in conservation. So I didn't want to, just bulldoze over people's livelihoods. And as some of you are aware, there was a lot of conflict with relation to seagrass conservation in other parts of the UK, and where people have stopped listening to each other. People have got very aggressive. People have lost sight of the science and not try to find solutions and just find problems, and they're just banging heads against each other, and they still are. And basically, I never wanted that to happen, and that's why I kind of felt, well, I think we can do this, and that's why we got Sue Burton and the Marine Conservation, the guys in Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum involved to actually tell people about the project, find ways to make this work and keep everyone happy, making sure that livelihoods were respected. We're a bit slow off the start there, but that's a regret. But essentially, that's what we were trying to do. And over the last couple of months, we've had a series of meetings. Back in, I think it was April, we met with the Yacht Club. Then July, we met with the Community Council. We've had a number of public meetings. We've set up some online feedbacks. We've presented at a number of local events, and we've been doing our best to share information. We've created a lot of materials to respond to frequently asked questions that remain on the website. So one of the first kind of concerns that people raised was about boating in and around seagrass. Can you navigate a boat through seagrass? Can you winterize a mooring in seagrass? Will your engine get clogged? Will your propeller get damaged and entangled? Can you drag your mooring? And the location of my mooring relative to the seagrass. So we've been trying to collate information and trying to provide examples of places where seagrasses do exist, and people's lives as fishermen, as yachties, as recreational users of the marine environments get on with life, and there's no concern and no issues. John Walmsley, as Commodore, went up to North Wales to a place called Porthdinllaen with Caroline, and visited the site where there's over 30 hectares of seagrass, and met a whole series of people that showed that people weren't being affected by seagrasses. Their boating activity, their fishing activity, their daily lives continued. And in some ways, there you've kind of got an interaction with Natural Resources Wales, because the seagrass has always been there, and the boating activity has increased over time. But in terms of people's daily life, there is no issue with seagrass. I also got a letter from someone that I've worked with in Cornwall, a fisherman and a dive operator from an organisation called Atlantic Scuba, Mark Milburn, and he's been a scallop fisher, gillnet fisher, and he's run a whole series of commercial boating operations in and around Helford River and Falmouth, where there's a lot of seagrass for 25 years. And a load of fears presented about damage to fisheries activity, and one of those is to move the impact of that seagrass away from the defined area of seagrass of fishing activity. Although I do stand by the fact that it would be therefore a great place to fish, but we've taken that decision to move away from that area. Future conservation management. This is almost the hardest thing to respond to, and we know that there's this issue of we'll put seagrass there, Natural Resources Wales will come in and protect it is a highly contentious, emotional issue, and we understand the background behind that, and we're working really hard to get some formalised information from the Welsh Government and Natural Resources Wales to actually state that they're supporting this project, not just because it's about seagrass, but because it's actually about bringing people's livelihoods into that conservation activity. So we create something that's unique and stand out, that people can respect, that shows that seagrass conservation can happen with people's livelihoods as part of that and not separate to it. And I really believe that NRW are actually committed to that. We've had conversations. We've got an email which we're still waiting for a final letter version. That's now on the Pembrokeshire Coastal Forum website, and I think it's a great point made that they support the idea that seagrass conservation is happening whilst respecting people's local livelihoods and way of life. We're also we've got a first draft of a letter from WWF and Sky stating their long-term opposition to creating an MCZ in Dale, which is people's big fears. But it's also important to point out that one of the key discussion points within Natural Resources Wales, as part of their review of marine conservation, is that they see that Dale is already part of the Pembrokeshire Special Area Conservation, so therefore it doesn't need to change its designation. So one of the other biggest concerns was that there was insufficient consultation happening, and I guess that I've already referred to that. And there was a letter sent from the Community Council alerting to this, and as a result of that, we're trying to reach out and find ways to, like what I'm doing tonight, starting from scratch, trying to explain where we came from, where we started, delaying any planting till the end of the year rather than in the autumn, and rather than just kind of going for a new Band 1 licence. And what we've actually we're doing now is proposing to apply for something called a Band 2 licence, which is a lot more expensive to obtain. But with that, it's a publicly available application, and there's a period of consultation that goes with it. So it gives anyone the opportunity to actually input into that decision over those 28 days. So people can write as individuals or organisations, and there'll be a very defined, clear procedure for doing that. But as part of that we want to then, what we want to do is propose that, put a big sort of circle around Dale and say, this is our area of search, and then get input from you guys as to where we could actually put that 2 hectares. So basically within that Band 2 licence, we'll just do a whole thing of Dale, and then dependent on where we can get some form of agreement, we then aim to plant the seagrass. There's a lot of other information that's available in terms of kind of responding to the concerns about insufficient consultation. This frequently asked questions page that Jetska has painstakingly pulled together. And there's also a feedback page where we're trying to get people's views on on the project, and also trying to get people to examine the different options that we're considering and kind of get some kind of favoured agreement. Some of the other questions that have come in via email, but I'm not sure if anyone has raised this in the room, was the water quality is terrible in Dale Bay. Why the hell are you planting seagrass in Dale? Okay, nutrients are elevated throughout the whole Milford Haven waterway. There's no hiding from that fact. But Dale's got a blue flag. Okay, that means that mostly the nasty bugs in the water are below a certain level. But we know there is reasonably high levels of nutrients. But in these seagrasses that we've grown and that natural patch that we found, we've actually tested the amount of nutrients in there, and they are low relative to other areas of the Haven. So if we compare it to Gellerswick, if we compare it to Longmoor, so actually we know that the conditions for the nutrients are actually reasonably good in Dale. But we do recognise that storm overflows remain an issue. There's been a number of comments made about that. From a seagrass perspective, they're not good, but they're periodic pulses. It's not very good for anyone, but it's certainly not my fault that exists. But what we're actually proposing to place into Dale Bay is a habitat that actually sucks up that nutrient, and isn't that a great thing to want to do? So we know clearly from studies on restored seagrass meadows in the US that a hectare is absorbing about 35 kilos of nitrogen per year. So that's a pretty good thing to get from your seagrass that you might not actually think. Okay, then the last section of this talk is about there's not enough info on what we're actually proposing. So we've been out, collected a whole load of seeding shoots whilst diving this summer. We then put them into Swansea University, into a whole series of tanks. We bubble them away, the seeds separate out, and then we put them into these little Hessian bags, and we string them out. And at the end, we'll put some heavier sandbags to help weigh them down. Over a sort of 6 to 12 month period, those lines will rot. And what does that look like in a 2 hectare scenario? Kind of perfect model that we have this kind of 2 hectare block that's 200 meters by 100 meters. And basically, every meter we have a line of bags laid out, and they're 1 meter apart. And at the end we have these larger sandbags that are anchors. And here you see some example of a bag after 6 months, and after 9 months, here's some of the shoots developing and growing. So we'd be going out typically on our boat, RV Calypso, small rib. We're hoping to rent a mooring from the yacht club to make life a bit sort of easier and deal with some of the concerns about parking and various other issues like that. But we'd be very, very slowly moving throughout the area of interest, laying these on the bottom, using very temporary moorings that are there only during the actual period of laying, and then sending divers down to make sure that they're landing properly and basically tucking them into the sediment. Very, very simple operation. If the area chosen is outside the moorings, then we'll request in the Bantu Marine Licence to get permission to put some temporary markers in that enable people to see where it is, and principally that's also related to the fears of a trawler coming in and damaging the area. Just before I kind of sum up, just a reminder, why are we bothering to plant seagrass? You know, it supports biodiversity and fisheries. There's a huge benefit in terms of seagrass baffling the energy of waves. It helps stabilise sediments. If you look at the sea level rise that predictions for Milford Haven waterway, you know, we're talking 30, 50 centimetres in the next sort of 20, 30 years. We're talking a metre within the next 70 years. So we're facing some stark realities. And seagrass is not going to save it, but it helps kind of spread the energy when big waves come through. As I said, it's filtering the water. It's taking some of those pollutants out of the water column. It's locking carbon dioxide